Hello all. So we're going to look at how to make a sound that's commonly referred to as the Reece Bass sound, and we're going to look at how we can use the sources in a bit more detail. So firstly, I'm just going to play you an example. It's just a little bit about the name. It originates from a producer called Kevin Saunderson, who was one of the people who is credited with inventing techno, and he used it in a track, and then it was leapt upon and sampled a lot in the kind of early 90s in the UK hardcore scene and jungle scene, and it's kind of just become one of those staple sounds now that's used across all, so many different types of genre. Okay, so let's have a listen to what a Reece sounds like, and I've put a little breakbeat in from my collection. I believe I sampled it from one of my own tracks, and yeah, we'll have a listen. Okay, so a big fat kind of tone. So how did I make it? So let's open up a fresh instance of Alchemy. Just going to make it a little larger on the screen. Okay, so we've got a sawtooth on source 1. I'm going to turn on the second source. But rather than tuning them here, we can tune just by semitones here. What I'm going to do is, if we click along the side here, we can go into all of our different sources individually. And over here we've got fine tuning, and that is what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to just pitch this one up by 10 cents. Okay, so this is just working with the spaces that are in between the notes. Okay, so a little bit like if you shake a note on the guitar, add a bit of vibrato. I suppose any instrument where you add vibrato. Okay, so that's the space we're working with there. Just to note, you can also add filters, etc. here. You can adjust panning. You can still adjust the tuning by semitones, and then there's a few other settings over here. This is how we can access white noise, which can be incredibly useful in production as well. Okay, but for today with our Reece Bass, we're just going to be working with the fine tuning. So that one's up 10. And then this one is going to go down by the same amount. So one is 10 cents higher, one is 10 cents lower. So what does this do? So we've started with the same waveform, but by changing the wave pitch, okay, what we're doing is we're changing the wavelength. And what this creates is a bit of a phase cancellation, okay? So why would we want phase cancellation? Well, have a listen. It just kind of sounds good. So you can hear it almost is creating a kind of modulation effect within the sound itself. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just remove that, just put those back to 0. Just to note as well, a good little tip with Alchemy, if you double click on any of the controls, it puts them to their 0 position. So this is that without the phase modulation. Okay, so this one I'll bring down, that one I'll turn back up. Okay, so there's a kind of swooshing. At the moment though, it's a little bit loud for my liking, so I am going to use a low pass filter and just hold a note until I feel I've removed enough high frequency for it to sound like a proper bass sound. So I'm just going to hold a note and pull down the cutoff until I think it sounds okay. And maybe just add a little bit of resonance in there just to emphasize those kind of low frequencies. So I've got that right down to 104 hertz, so very low. Okay, and it's a 12 dB filter, so it's not cutting off too harshly, but you know, feel free to experiment and make your own Reeces. So you can hear that's with a 24 dB, but I quite liked the original one. Okay, then I'm going to go over to the voices section. Okay, so there's a few interesting things here. The number of voices, let's just decide how many notes can be played at once. Now for this particular bass sound, I'd strongly recommend having just the one voice, because when we play bass, it's very rare for us to use more than one note at a time, and it's quite handy when you have overlapping notes if you're sketching out a MIDI part that they don't overlap, because it just sounds really messy. Okay, and what I'm going to use as well is I'm going to use the glide function, and what this does is it will create a little slide between the notes. So any stringed instrument you can do slides, so you'll know the kind of sound, things like trombones and brass instruments as well. Okay, so what this does, I'll have a listen. So that's me doing an octave slide, so it's sliding between an octave. Okay, and you can choose how long that takes, okay? And you can choose to do it in time, or you can choose to do it in the rate. Okay, I've not done anything with the amp envelope yet. So just to remind you, the amp envelope is always the default setting for one voice. But what I might do is just increase the attack and the release ever so slightly. Occasionally, bass sounds are prone to a few clicks and pops when you either input notes or they're released, because of the size of the waveforms is generally quite big. Okay, just as another useful little tip, when I program these notes, I chose to work in F minor. The key's quite important if you're writing certain styles of music where you would like the bass to be you know, really resonant and big on a sound system. Okay, any key around F tends to work quite well, so I would suggest not going any lower than E flat, and probably not going any higher than G, you know, G minor. Normally, a lot of electronic music is, you know, predominantly written in minor keys as well, which can seem quite perverse given that it's the music we go out and party to, but there we go, it sounds a bit cheesy if it's not. And that is how you make a Reece bass. Hopefully this has been useful to you, and thank you for listening.